So today I want to talk about one of my favorite topics. It's all about collaborating and collaborating with people who aren't in the same room with you. In other words, virtual collaboration. And I love this topic for a number of reasons. One is I've been doing it for the last 20 years in my business. The other reason, and part of the reason why I've been doing it, is because I live in Perth, Western Australia, which is supposedly the world's most remote city. So for people from Perth and WA, we've had to do virtual collaboration for a long time, long before it became a necessity. And now for many businesses, whether you're a business owner or you're a leader within a business or running a team, virtual collaboration is not just an option, but is essential because our world has become much more connected, because our world has become much smaller, and because our world has become much more digital. So in our fast, flat, and free world, virtual collaboration is absolutely essential. In fact, it's one of those skills that I think you need to become future-proof for yourself, for your team, and for your business and your organization. The Institute for the Future, which is an organization out of the University of Phoenix in Arizona in the USA, they identified 10 skills for the future workforce. And if you want, you can download their report. Just go to Institute for the Future and download their report about future work skills. But in particular, virtual collaboration was one of those skills. You can see all the 10 skills here. I'm not going to go through them because I just want to show you all 10 of them. And one of them, these are not in any particular order, so it's not that virtual collaboration is the least important, but I've grouped them in 3 groups. So the first 3 are how you take information in, the next 3 are how you share information with the world, and these last 4 are about your relationships with people. And virtual collaboration obviously fits into that last category, and it is really, really important. So we're going to talk today about working from virtually anywhere. And you might have some of your team members who are working remotely or virtually. There's some people, you may have your whole team who works remotely or virtually, as I do, or it may be that you've got all of your people at the moment in office and you're considering how to make your team more distributed. Okay, so I hope you get some practical ideas from today's webinar about that. So let me start with a story. This is a story about Steve Shirley. And Steve Shirley started a software company in 1962. So 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago, Steve started this company. And there's some really interesting things about this company. So first of all, most of the software at that time was for financial services like database and accounting processing, and Steve was kind of bored with that. So the company, which was called Freelance Programmers, decided to focus on working with more technology stuffs like NASA and Boeing and companies like that. So they worked in a very niche market, which was very different from what most people did at the time. The second thing was so the company was called Freelance Programmers, and Steve employed women working from home. Almost all the workforce were women working from home. So imagine this is in London in the 1960s when there was no internet. So every day these women working from home would work out this kind of software and write it up on cards, which then Royal Mail would pick up twice a day and deliver to London, and they would be punched into the mainframe computers, and then the next day the results were sent back, and these women had to do more work on it. So women were very important in the early software days. It's not very well known, but they were a large part of the software workforce at the time. However, so we had this company set up by Steve Shirley, who was working in a niche market in a day when there's no internet, and yet had a whole workforce of women working from home. And then later, many years later, when it was floated on the UK stock exchange, it was valued at £3 billion, and many of the original founders who had shares in the company became instant millionaires. So that's the story of Steve Shirley. And if you don't know that story, so this is Steve Shirley here. The person I've been calling Steve Shirley is in fact Dame Stephanie Shirley, and she used to sign her name Steve on memos to arrange appointments, so people didn't know that she was a woman until she turned up to the meetings, and then they couldn't kick her out. So as a credibility thing, she used to call herself Steve Shirley. And if you want to hear more of her story, then go and watch her TED Talk, which is very recent. Why do ambitious women have flat heads? I won't answer the question, but I hope you find that the point of the story is that we've been doing virtual collaboration in the world for more than 50 years, even before there was an internet. It's not mainstream yet, but it is still growing. It's growing very fast and is still one of the most important changes in the modern workplace. So Before we get into these 5 principles that I'm going to share with you, I'd just like to know how much of your team is what I'm calling out of office. So they're not all in the same office as you. So I've got a poll here, and if you haven't done polls before, they're very easy. I'll just launch the first poll here, and you'll see it coming up on your screen. And this one, you can just tick one of the boxes. So you can see the options there, which is, I just want to know, like, what's your team like? Do they all work in the office? Do they all work out of the office? Do some regularly, like work 2 or 3 days part-time from home? Do some of them work full-time from home, and so on? Okay, and you may not fit into every one of these, into any one of these categories exactly, but just do what you think is the best fit. Okay, I see 70% of people have voted. Great. So I'll leave the poll open for about another 3 seconds. Yeah, and there's some people saying in the comments that none of them apply in my case. And I mean, maybe that for you as well, that you may have, you may be a sole operator, or you may be have some other business structure or workplace structure. Okay, let's have a look at the results. Okay, and I've done this for different audiences. Obviously, there's no right or wrong answer, and the mix is different for different people. Yeah, okay, so we've got no people in this particular group where they have their full team working all the time in the office. And, more and more that is the case. And every time I run this poll, that number at the top, or that category at the top, is always the lowest, because you think of your team as even people you outsource work to, and they're people that you have who are freelancers. So there's all that sort of out of office work, which is now becoming more common and more popular. But you can see there's a lot of people here who, most of the team members are working full-time from home. So most or all, if you like, without any time in the office at all. Great. Thank you for sharing that. Let me hide those poll results, and we'll continue. See, the thing with this virtual work or the virtual team is that people want this. People want this flexibility. In fact, let me ask you a question. If I asked you, this survey was done a couple of years ago about people who have never worked remotely. In other words, they've always worked full-time in an office, would give up alcohol in order to work remotely at least 1 day a week. So I'd just like to ask you to guess, what do you think the percentage of people are? So I've left out the number there. Okay, and actually, Matthew, to the answer to the previous question, most of my colleagues work in an office, but not in the same office. Yeah, and there are these more and more these globally distributed teams as well. Okay, so I'm seeing some of the answers coming in. 40%, 15% would give up alcohol. 70%. Okay, and I forgot to mention that I'm going to send a copy of my book, The Future of Leadership, to the person who gets closest to this. 100%, 60%, 65%. All right, so the person who got closest, where was the survey? Actually, I think this survey, Richard, was done in the UK/Europe. That might affect alcohol. Okay, and 80%. Okay, so the answer is, you can see it coming up here, that 32% of people who have never worked remotely would give up alcohol in order to work remotely 1 day a week. So Paul Worth got the closest with 40%. So Paul, if you could just, in the question box, type in your postal address, because it's a physical book, and I'll send it out to you later on in the day. So thank you for taking part in that as well. Let's look at these 5 myths of leading virtual teams. So if you're a manager or a leader or a business owner, and you're still working within a and you've got virtual teams or distributed teams, then here are 5 of the myths that people generally this is another research study that was done, that managers and leaders thought that these were the problems with leading a virtual team. So one is, it's difficult to build trust in a team because they're not in the same office. The second is, it's difficult to create synergy because you don't bump into people all the time, or hang around with them at lunch, or catch up with them when you're walking down to the car park, so you don't have these innovative ideas at random moments. The third one is that managers and leaders felt that your virtual or remote team members feel isolated and detached, so they aren't as happy. And the fourth one is that when you're recruiting and onboarding and bringing people on and choosing people for your team, interpersonal skills don't matter as much because they're generally just sitting at a computer screen, so they don't need to be as strong with interpersonal skills. And the last one is that it's difficult to measure and reward their performance because you don't see them around every day, so you don't see what work they're doing. So remember, these are all 5 myths, but these are common beliefs from managers and leaders about having teams where some of their members are virtual or distributed. And by the way, I'm using the word virtual throughout this webinar because that's the most common word that's used. But if you think about those words, virtual team, remote team, and distributed team, the first two, virtual team and remote team, kind of treat those people who aren't in the office as like second-class citizens because they're remote or they're virtual, so they don't sound like the norm. So I, in general, prefer the term distributed team, because then everyone fits into that category. So some people are in the office, some people are elsewhere, but the team is distributed. So I'm going to keep using the word virtual team because that's the more common term. But if you're a leader or manager and you want to make everyone feel equal, then change your terminology and use the word distributed team. Okay, so as I said, these are all myths, so let's quickly go through these myths and debunk them. So the first one is that it's difficult to build trust because what happens in office teams is that trust is built by personal rapport. So you talk about what happened on the weekend and what your kids did and what your footy team did. So all of those things help build trust with team members. What happens with remote or distributed or virtual teams is that trust is built differently, and trust in a virtual team or between team members is built based on professional performance and outcomes. So it's based on reliability. It's whether people are consistent, whether they act with integrity, how responsive are they. So those are the sort of things that people use as measures of trust. And if you're a manager or leader, this is great because that's exactly what you should be looking for anyway in your team, because if you've got team members who are reliable, consistent, act with integrity and are responsive, they're going to be more productive anyway. So it helps you in both areas. But look at, how good are your team members and also how good are you? So if I was to turn the spotlight back on you, this is not a poll in any way, but you might want to ask yourself these questions. How good are you at setting deadlines and managing the expectations around the deadline? So when you set a deadline and a team member has a piece of work to be done, are you constantly emailing them and asking them how they're going? Or do you trust them enough that you've given them the deadline, they have the skills, they have the expertise, and they have the judgment to come back to you if they need help? Have you set the expectations appropriately about how you're going to work together? So if you've got a deadline that they need to send you something back by 2 p.m., but then a different time zone, what does 2 p.m. mean? Have you made that clear? Have you made clear what they have to send back to you? And this is not just you, it's like within your whole team. And the third thing is, do you use the appropriate channels? So are you constantly doing stuff by email when you should be using instant messaging or an online forum, or vice versa? Or should you be picking up the phone and calling them instead of sending email, or vice versa? Is this something that can be managed by email? So there's one thing here. Are you an email courier? An email courier is not a good thing, but if you're working in an office, are you the sort of person who sends somebody an email and then 3 minutes later walks over to their desk and says, hey, did you get my email? Because if you're that sort of person, then it might be more of a challenge for you when you move to a more distributed team, because you can't do that anymore. But it shows a lack of trust and a lack of giving people responsibility. Okay, so that's one thing to consider. When you're building trust, it's built differently. And the next one is synergy. And synergy is an interesting one because there's this belief that synergy and great ideas only happen because people bump into each other randomly, or sometimes in a structured way. So Google, for example, and people often quote Google as an example of a company that measures everything, and they do. So one of the things they do is in their canteen, everyone uses the same canteen, so there isn't an executive cafe, but they have measured the optimum length of the line for people to wait to be served at the canteen. If it's too long, then people won't go to the canteen. They'll eat at their desks or they'll eat elsewhere because it's too much of a nuisance. But if it's too short, then people get served too quickly and there isn't a chance for them to talk to the person next to them who might be from a completely different department, who might be a senior manager, and this is just like a normal employee lower down this scale talking to them. But those are the opportunities for synergy. So Google tries to engineer synergy just like they try to engineer everything else. And there is this belief that you can't create synergy when you've got a distributed or virtual team because you don't have those opportunities. Again, it's a myth, and the truth and the reality is that there are plenty of organizations that do have great synergy with their virtual teams. It's just that it's done differently by using collaboration software. So collaboration tools are absolutely critical if you want to create synergy and if you want to have an innovative distributed team. So let's look briefly at some of those tools. Some of those tools, and I won't go into detail on any of them. I might mention a few names, but I won't go into detail on any of them. But if you think about you're creating synergy for both collaboration and innovation, you probably have your own tools. And in fact, I'm going to stop after I finish this slide to ask you what tools you're using in either of these two categories. But you've got document sharing tools like Dropbox and Google Docs. You've got things like Evernote, which are widely used, and then the Microsoft suite, the Citrix suite, depending on what you've got set up in your organization. You've got online meetings, so things like GoToWebinar, GoToMeeting, Zoom, Skype video, and there's a whole bunch of tools available for you to do online meetings, including video meetings, which are becoming popular now because the technology now supports it. And then you've got instant messaging, where there's SMS or Skype messaging or other instant messaging tools, or like internal Twitter kind of messaging tools like Slack, which are very popular within organizations. And then, not mainstream yet, but virtual reality, where you'll be able to put on a virtual reality headset and you can be in a meeting room and you look around and you're sitting there with your colleagues. It's just that they might also be with virtual reality headsets. They might be anywhere around the world, but it's like you're sitting there in a meeting room with all the pros and cons that go along with that. So you can collaborate now with a distributed or virtual team. You can innovate as well. There are online mind mapping tools where everyone goes in and works on a collaborative mind map. There are virtual whiteboards which have the same sort of idea, that we're all looking at something on our screen, we're scribbling on the board, somebody else, as they would do in an in-person meeting, kind of stands up and scribbles on the same whiteboard, but you do it on your screen and everyone sees it at the same time. And there are a few other things, some technology that's on its way. 3D printing is another example where people can now, with gestures, design something, and then that goes to a printer, which then prints it. And that can be, the printer can be in an office completely separate from where the person is actually designing it. So you can have somebody on one side of the world designing something, and it prints on an office in the other side of the world. Augmented reality is the idea that, like the Pokemon Go craze kind of made this popular, where people can be walking around and they get, looking at the real world, they see that real world augmented with this digital information. So you could have your team members who are doing a site visit, for example, and they're walking around, so you can see what they're seeing, but they can also see a chat and conversation that's coming up through their glasses or their headset as they're walking around. So all of those things mean that synergy, innovation, creativity can happen, and can happen not only just as well, but sometimes even better than in the physical in-person offices. So just like to know, what are you using? What sort of tools are you using? I'm happy for you to type in like names like Dropbox, that's in fact somebody said that, or somebody, or anything else, any other tools that you're using for collaboration or innovation. So there can be names, or there can be, you might just say, a mind map, whatever, I don't mind either way. So I can see Zoom, Dropbox, Trello, Zoom, yep, I forgot to say Trello, the project management tool, or task management tool, Zoom, Dropbox, Google Drive, OneDrive, Whiteboard, Zoom, yep, Zoom.us, yep, Dropbox, Office 365, which is another tool that I use, great, and I'm glad, Graham, that you're using the collaborative features in that. WebEx for video conferencing, document sharing, OneDrive, yeah, great. Okay, so lots of people are using these collaborative tools. Just keep your eye out for some of these newer ones, like when we get virtual reality headsets that are, well, they're already available. You can get Google Cardboard and turn your smartphone into a virtual reality headset, but the software for it is not yet ready for us to do this sort of office collaboration. But look out for things like virtual reality, 3D printing, augmented reality, and how you can apply them to your workplace, and particularly to virtual, for your virtual collaboration purposes. In fact, there was some research done and was published in the Harvard Business Review that said, and I've got the citation here for you, or at least a title, Why Brainstorming Works Better Online, that suggested that online brainstorming is actually not just as good as, but even better than in-person brainstorming. So if you want to know more about that, or you need to justify virtual collaboration to your managers or to your team members, then look up that article in the Harvard Business Review. Okay, so we've done the main three. The other two, sorry, the first two are the main two. The other three we'll go through more briefly because there's not really much I want to talk about in terms of specific tools. I just want to kind of debunk the myths. So the myth number 3 is saying that the myth is that your team members who work away from an office feel isolated, detached, not part of the team. And the research shows that that is true, but maybe not to the extent that you think. So there's some people who absolutely would much prefer to work in an office, and they need that structure, they need the camaraderie of having people in the same office. So some people say, yes, we do feel more isolated, so that's at 35% there, but about the same percent disagree. They go, no, we don't feel isolated at all. They quite like the flexibility of working from home. They create their own social networks. They find their own ways of creating connection and rapport, both with their team members and with other people. And then there's a whole bunch of other people who say, yeah, look, it doesn't matter. I don't mind one way or the other. So really, the myth is that the reality is that it's only 1/3 of the people who do feel isolated, which is why it's a myth. And if you want to increase the connection, then most people, most remote users feel more connected with video conferencing. This is some research done a couple of years ago, and for some people here, you're going to go, well, duh, that's obvious, video conferencing is better. And yet, I think some people will find that a surprise. They wouldn't have thought of using video conferencing, but I reckon that you should. I reckon you should really seriously consider, if you've got distributed team members or virtual team members, then really invest in learning how to do video conferencing well. It doesn't require a lot of money investment because the tools are literally free, or if not free, very low cost, but learn the practices of doing video conferencing well, which doesn't take much. It just takes some practice to get it right. Okay, number 4, the myth is that when you're looking at is particularly recruiting people who might work away from an office, then interpersonal skills aren't important because they're just sitting behind a computer. The reality is exactly the opposite. So interpersonal skills are actually more important, so personal and interpersonal, because when you think about their personal skills, they have to be able to manage, and they're not stuck in an office, so they're not protected by office walls, so they have to manage competing priorities in what's going on around them in their times, because they might work at different times of the day. They may have to create their own support networks. They have to be self-motivated to be able to work by themselves without having you watching over them or without having their team members and their peer pressure. And then when they have to interact with other people, they don't have the visual cues that they otherwise would have if they were in person in an office. Sometimes it might be quite a different culture from theirs, so they have to communicate with people without seeing them face to face or interacting with them in person. And all of that has to be done through electronic channels. So interpersonal skills, when you're looking at recruiting team members or choosing them for distributed work, are essential. They're more important than the skills that they need for working in an office. And the last one is that especially leaders and managers say we can't measure and reward their performance because we can't see them at work. And that's just, I mean, the debunking of that is simply that they're managing and measuring the wrong things. So measure results rather than effort. So don't measure the amount of time they put in, but measure the results that they achieve. Another way of putting it is measure their output, not their input. And it's too easy to measure when you've got people and you can see them, to judge them based on what you can see. But if somebody does a one-day job in half a day and then sits with their legs up on their desk on playing around on Facebook and reading comic and magazines, does that mean that they're less productive? Well, in an office, typically they are considered as lazy, slack people. However, if they've achieved the same result in half the time, they should be rewarded. And one of the nice things about virtual collaboration, virtual team members, is that you don't get to see how long they take to do the work. You get to see the results, and you can absolutely measure them more objectively based on those results. So you've got to kind of be a manager and leader who's willing to measure that way, and then reward that sort of performance as well, based on the results, not based on the effort. Okay, so we looked at those 5 areas, those 5 myths, and I hope you agree that we've debunked them effectively. I've got a second poll for you here. So the second poll is, of those things that we talked about, and I will just launch the poll and then you can answer it. So I've kind of got one idea for each of those 5 myths. So is building trust, using online collaboration tools, keeping in touch with people more so they feel less isolated. By the way, you can tick more than one box in this one. So what I'm asking is, which of these can you easily improve quickly in your organization? And I reckon it doesn't matter whether you're a business owner who's got a whole bunch of outsourced team members and that's it, or whether you're working in a large organization where you've got a large team that you're responsible for. You can do any of these things, but I'm looking at quick wins. So what I'd love you to do is get stuff that you can then walk away and go, great, as soon as I finish this webinar, I'm going to put these ideas into practice. Okay, so one person said not applicable in my case, and I reckon that may not be true, because I reckon even in that person's case, and I know this person, I kind of know a little bit about their business, I reckon you can, because you might start using outsourced providers, or you've got a forum of people that you may do work with, so they are your people who are part of your team, who aren't in the same office as you. Okay, so most people have voted, so let me show you the results. You can see a few more results coming in. You can see the numbers changing, so let me leave it open for another 10 seconds. Okay, great. Okay, let me share the results here so you can see what people said. Okay, the number one, the highest one, proactively keep in touch more. And I'm smiling at this because this is my biggest challenge and resolution as well with my outsourced team members and my contracted team members. And that's the thing that I need to do most of as well. Online collaboration tools is number 2, great. Okay, and then a mix between the others, great. Brilliant. And I reckon that the reason that last one, reward results, not activity, is low is simply because I reckon many people on this webinar are already doing that based on the first poll. I reckon you're probably already doing that, so it's something you don't need to do, but you're already doing. So all of those things should be high. It's just that I'm asking for you to do, because I'm asking you what things you're going to change, then some of them are going to be low because you're already doing them really well. Great. I'm glad that you're going to keep proactively keep in touch more with your team members, your distributed team members. So just as we finish up, I just want to ask you 3 questions about how fit you are to be able to lead and manage a distributed team. I reckon the 3 questions you should be asking yourself as a business owner or business leader or leader within a business is, number 1, can you include people who aren't here, like here is actually physically around? Are you good at including them as well? Can you trust people when you're not around? And obviously when they're not around as well. And the third one is, are you the sort of person who can actually reward output, not just input? Okay, so I hope you got some valuable ideas there. I go into that in a little bit more detail in this special report, which, as I said, if you complete the exit survey, then I will send that to you. It goes through exactly those 5 myths, and it gives you the resource, so the references for all the research there as well as a little bit more information than I covered in the webinar. So thank you very much for coming. I just want to tell you that I ran a webinar, one of my the best webinars I ran. I really enjoyed it, how to build a mobile app in an hour. I ran that last week, so if you missed it, the recording is available, so you can get that. Just go to gihanpereira.com, and in the shop section, you can get the recording of that. So a few people missed the webinar, but they've bought the recording because they want to know how to build their own smartphone app. Thank you everyone for coming along. If you're interested in finding out more about this topic, and if you know anyone who's running a conference or you're running a conference, this is what I speak about. And one of the my main topic is fit for the future, and one of the things we talk about, if it's relevant for your people and for your audience, is this idea of virtual collaboration. So if you're interested, get in touch with me at gihanspeaks.com, or email me at gihan@gihanpereira.com. If you enjoyed this webinar, please send people along to my website and ask them to register for the webinar series, because it is available free and completely it will continue to be free. So if you're already registered for this webinar series, then you don't need to keep registering. If you're not, go to gihanpereira.com and register. So thanks everyone, and all the best for doing more with your virtual teams, your distributed teams, your remote teams. Thanks everyone. Bye for now.